Charlotte Hayes never expected her life to change in the middle of a disastrous catering shift, but when the man in the custom-tailored suit fixed his intense blue eyes on her, she knew she was in trouble. "Marry me," he said, his voice smooth and commanding, like he was used to getting exactly what he wanted. Charlotte nearly dropped the tray of champagne flutes she was holding. "Excuse me." The man, who she now recognized as James Calloway, the young millionaire entrepreneur whose name was whispered in every business magazine, didn't flinch. He leaned in slightly, his cologne rich and expensive. "I need a wife, temporarily, and I think you'll do." Charlotte blinked at him. This had to be some kind of joke. She was a part-time server, drowning in student loans and barely making rent on her tiny apartment. Meanwhile, James Calloway was the kind of man who owned skyscrapers, drove cars worth more than her entire existence, and probably didn't even know what a budget was. "Is this some kind of prank?" she asked, crossing her arms. James smirked, just a hint of amusement in the otherwise serious expression. "No prank, a business deal." She stared at him, waiting for him to continue. "My grandfather's will states that I need to be married in order to inherit Calloway Enterprises. The board is watching. I need a wife fast. You need money, don't you?" His gaze flicked to her worn-out shoes, the way her uniform was slightly too big, the exhaustion in her eyes. Charlotte bristled. "Wow, you really know how to charm a girl." James exhaled sharply, as if patience wasn't his strong suit. "I'll pay you, handsomely, $1 million for 1 year of marriage." Her breath caught. $1 million. That would wipe out her debt, change her life entirely. Still, the idea was ridiculous. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," James said smoothly. "All I need is someone who can play the role, be my wife in public, attend events, smile for the press. After a year we divorce and you walk away with the money." Charlotte should have said no. She should have walked away. But the reality of her life weighed heavily on her shoulders, the bills, the stress, the endless struggle. And James Calloway, with his piercing gaze and dangerously confident smirk, was offering her an escape. "Fine," she said before she could overthink it. "I'll do it." James smiled, but there was something unreadable in his expression. "Good choice." The next morning, Charlotte found herself in the back of a sleek black car with James beside her, reviewing the terms of their arrangement. "You'll move into my penthouse," he said, flipping through documents. "We need to appear as a real couple." Charlotte's stomach twisted. "Living together?" "Of course, the press will be watching." "We need to make this convincing." She swallowed hard. It wasn't just about pretending in public, she'd actually have to live with him, be around him constantly. "Fine," she muttered. "Anything else?" James handed her a thick contract. "Read through this. It outlines everything. No real intimacy required, just public appearances and shared living space." Charlotte took the papers, her mind spinning. This was real. She was about to marry a millionaire. And yet, as she glanced at James, the way his jaw clenched, the way his fingers tapped against his knee, it occurred to her that maybe this arrangement wasn't just business for him. Maybe James Calloway had secrets of his own. Charlotte barely had time to process what she had agreed to before she found herself swept into a whirlwind of luxury and expectations. Within 24 hours, she was standing in a private boutique, surrounded by racks of designer gowns that probably cost more than her entire apartment lease. A team of stylists hovered around her, their hands adjusting fabrics, measuring her for fittings, and discussing which dress would be most fitting for a Calloway bride. James sat nearby, his phone in one hand and a glass of whiskey in the other, looking entirely unaffected by the chaos. Every now and then, his sharp blue eyes flicked toward her, assessing. She caught his gaze in the mirror, lifting a brow. "Enjoying yourself," he smirked slightly, setting his phone down. "Just making sure my investment looks the part." Charlotte rolled her eyes but couldn't deny the way her heart stuttered at his words. Investment. That was all she was to him, nothing more. As she stepped into an elegant ivory gown with delicate lace along the sleeves, the room fell silent. The head stylist gasped, clasping her hands together. James stood, placing his glass on the nearby table as he approached. He didn't say a word for a long moment, just let his gaze sweep over her. Finally, he spoke, his voice quieter than usual. "That one—" Something in his tone made her stomach flip, but she quickly pushed the feeling aside. This wasn't real, it was a transaction. The following days passed in a blur, a courthouse ceremony with only a few select witnesses, a rush of media attention. And then suddenly, Charlotte was stepping into the penthouse that would be her home for the next year. The space was breathtaking. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the glittering skyline. Sleek furniture filled the vast open-concept living room, and everything smelled faintly of James' expensive cologne and something undeniably masculine. She wandered toward the glass windows, pressing her fingers against the cool surface. "I could fit my entire apartment in your bathroom, couldn't I?" James chuckled from behind her. "Probably." She turned, crossing her arms. "So, what now? Do we have a schedule for when we have to pretend to like each other?" His smirk returned. "I don't think pretending will be a problem for you." Charlotte felt her cheeks heat. "Excuse me." "You may not realize it," he said, stepping closer, "but you're a terrible liar. When you dislike something, it's written all over your face, and when you don't." His gaze flicked to her lips just for a second before he stepped back. "Let's just say I don't think people will have trouble believing we're married." She swallowed hard, hating the way he affected her. "You're awfully confident," he simply shrugged. "Confidence is what got me here." And with that, he walked away, leaving Charlotte standing there, feeling like she had just stepped into a game she wasn't prepared to play. Over the next few weeks, their public appearances began. Dinners at exclusive restaurants, charity galas, business meetings where she was expected to smile and nod as James introduced her as his wife. The first time he touched her in public, it was at a high-profile event, cameras flashing all around them. His hand rested lightly on her lower back, guiding her through the crowd. It was barely anything, a simple gesture, but it sent a jolt of awareness through her. She glanced up at him, but he was already focused on the conversation in front of him, unaffected. Meanwhile, she was unraveling. Charlotte knew this was dangerous. Not because she didn't trust James, she didn't, but because she didn't trust herself. A month into their arrangement, things took an unexpected turn. One evening, after yet another business event, Charlotte kicked off her heels and collapsed onto the plush couch in the penthouse. "I don't understand how you do this all the time," she groaned. James loosened his tie, pouring himself a drink before sinking into the chair across from her. "You get used to it." She watched him for a moment, noting the way his usual mask of control seemed slightly fractured. "You don't actually like it, do you?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What makes you say that?" "You put on a good show," she admitted, "but when you think no one's looking, you always seem tired." Something flickered in his eyes, but it was gone before she could place it. "You're perceptive," she shrugged. "I wait tables for a living. I've gotten good at reading people." A silence stretched between them, heavier than before, and then, almost reluctantly, James spoke again. "My grandfather built Callaway Enterprises from the ground up. He raised me to take over, and when he passed, he left everything in my hands under the condition that I prove I can maintain the ideal Callaway image." Charlotte frowned. "And the ideal Callaway image includes a wife." His lips twisted into something resembling a smirk, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Apparently." She hesitated before asking, "Is that why you don't date? Because of the company?" His jaw tensed. "Dating, love, marriage, none of it is real in my world, Charlotte. Everything is a transaction, a power move." Her chest tightened at his words. "That's kind of sad." James met her gaze, something unreadable in his own. It's just reality. For the first time since they struck their deal, Charlotte realized something. James Calloway, the man who seemed to have everything, was lonelier than she had ever imagined. And despite everything, despite knowing she shouldn't, she felt a pang of something dangerously close to sympathy. Charlotte wasn't sure when the lines started to blur. At first, it was easy to remind herself that this was a business arrangement. She was here for a reason: to play the perfect wife, to smile for the cameras, to secure James's inheritance while securing her own financial future. But then came the little things. The way James always seemed to notice when she was cold, draping his jacket over her shoulders without a word. The way he never let her walk on the side of the street closest to traffic. The way he listened, really listened when she spoke, even when the conversation had nothing to do with business. And the way he looked at her sometimes, like she was something unexpected and dangerous, something he couldn't quite control. One evening, after a particularly exhausting charity gala, they returned to the penthouse. Charlotte kicked off her heels the moment they walked through the door, groaning as she stretched out her sore feet. James chuckled, loosening his tie as he watched her. "You act like you've run a marathon." She shot him a look. "You try walking around in these torture devices for 5 hours and then get back to me." He smirked, but then, to her complete shock, he walked over and knelt in front of her, reaching for her foot. Her breath hitched. "What are you doing?" "Helping." His voice was gruff, quiet. He gently took her ankle in his hands, his thumbs pressing into the arch of her foot, massaging away the ache. Charlotte sucked in a sharp breath, heat coiling low in her stomach. She should have pulled away, should have made a joke to break the tension, but she couldn't move. James's fingers were warm, firm, and entirely too intimate. Her pulse raced as she watched him, the way his brows furrowed slightly in concentration, the way his grip was careful but sure. He wasn't just going through the motions, he was actually trying to make her feel better. When he glanced up at her, his blue eyes dark and unreadable, her entire body went still. Something was happening between them, something dangerous and unspoken. She was the first to break the silence. "James." He exhaled sharply, as if coming back to reality, and pulled his hands away, standing abruptly. "This is a mistake," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. Charlotte swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. "What is this?" He gestured vaguely between them, his jaw tight. "Whatever this is." She forced a small laugh, trying to lighten the moment. "There is no this, remember. We're just business partners." James's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment she thought he was going to say something real. But then he turned away, heading toward his bedroom without another word. She should have felt relieved. Instead, she felt like she was losing a battle she hadn't even realized she was fighting. The next few weeks were filled with tension. James became more distant, more controlled, as if trying to put space between them, and Charlotte told herself that was a good thing. But then, one night, everything changed. It was late. The city lights outside the penthouse windows cast a soft glow over the living room. Charlotte had been curled up on the couch, half asleep, when she heard James's voice, low, sharp. She sat up, frowning. He was on the phone, pacing near the window, his back tense. "I don't care what the board thinks," he snapped. "I won't let them control my life." A pause. Then his voice dropped, quieter but no less intense. "I know what's at stake." "But this isn't just about the company anymore." Charlotte's heart pounded. James never let his emotions slip. Never, but right now he looked furious, and maybe even a little lost. She hesitated before speaking. "James," he turned sharply, as if he had forgotten she was there. For a moment he just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then with a sigh he ran a hand down his face and walked over, sinking onto the couch beside her. "They're threatening to cut me out," he admitted after a long silence. Charlotte frowned. "What?" "Why? Because they think this marriage is a sham." His voice was bitter. They think I'm manipulating my way into the inheritance. Charlotte's stomach twisted, but that's not true. I mean, yes, this started as a deal, but she stopped herself before she could say something reckless. James's gaze flicked to her lips for a fraction of a second before he looked away. They're demanding proof, she swallowed. What kind of proof? James hesitated, then said, a public display, something undeniable. Charlotte's pulse raced. She already knew what he meant. A kiss. A real one. Not the polite, staged pecks they had exchanged for the cameras, not the rehearsed smiles, something raw, something believable, something dangerous. James watched her carefully as if giving her a chance to back out, but she didn't, because deep down she knew the truth. She wanted this, and that terrified her. Slowly, James reached for her, his fingers brushing along her jaw, tilting her chin up. "This is a bad idea," he murmured. Charlotte's breath hitched. "Probably." But neither of them moved away, and then he kissed her. It wasn't soft, it wasn't hesitant, it was fire and desperation, a collision of everything unspoken between them. Charlotte gasped against his mouth, her hands fisting in his shirt as he pulled her closer. His grip firm but reverent, as if he was afraid to let go. And for the first time since this arrangement began, she realized something. She was in trouble, because this wasn't just a kiss. This was the beginning of something she wasn't sure she could walk away from. Charlotte didn't sleep that night. Long after James had disappeared into his bedroom, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her heart still pounding. The kiss had changed everything. It wasn't just for show. It wasn't just a performance. James had kissed her like he needed her, like he'd been holding back for far too long and couldn't stop himself anymore. And worse, she had kissed him back. This was supposed to be a business deal, a temporary arrangement, nothing real. But now she wasn't so sure. The next morning, Charlotte found herself in the penthouse's sprawling kitchen, staring blankly at a cup of coffee, trying to make sense of the mess in her head. She heard him before she saw him. James's footsteps were always deliberate, confident, like he owned every space he stepped into. He entered the kitchen, looking as put together as ever in a crisp white dress shirt, the top button undone, his sleeves rolled up. He moved with his usual effortless control, pouring himself a coffee without a word. For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with everything unsaid. Finally, James spoke, his voice lower than usual. "Last night, it was a mistake." Charlotte cut him off before he could say anything that might make this harder. James's jaw tightened. "That's what you think." She forced a nod, gripping her coffee cup like a lifeline. "We had to sell the marriage, right? That's all it was." James studied her, his gaze sharp and unreadable. She knew him well enough now to recognize that he was calculating something, deciding whether or not to push. But then he surprised her. "Right," he said quietly, his expression carefully neutral. "A business decision." She hated the way that hurt. Before she could say anything else, his phone buzzed. James glanced at the screen and cursed under his breath. "The board wants to meet," he muttered. "They want to assess our marriage in person." Charlotte's stomach twisted. "What does that mean?" James exhaled sharply. "It means they expect us to act like a real couple, not just in front of cameras but in private. They want to see us together, interacting. They want to make sure this isn't just for show." Her fingers tightened around her cup. "And if they don't believe us," James's gaze darkened, "then I lose everything." Charlotte swallowed hard. This was getting more complicated by the second. The board meeting was held at one of James's private estates, an opulent, sprawling mansion just outside the city. Charlotte had never been somewhere so extravagant. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, walls were lined with priceless art, and the staff moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring that everything was flawless. As they entered the grand dining hall, a group of older men and women members of the Callaway Enterprises board watched them closely. James's grip on her waist was firm but not forceful, a silent reminder that they were in this together. Mr. Calloway, one of the board members, a sharp-eyed man in his 60s, greeted him. His gaze flicked to Charlotte, assessing. "And Mrs. Calloway, a pleasure." Charlotte smiled, hoping it looked natural. "Thank you for having us." The evening was tense. The board asked questions about their relationship, their life together, their future plans. Charlotte answered as best she could, sticking to the script she and James had agreed upon. But then, one of the women leaned forward, her expression skeptical. "Forgive me, but I must ask, how do you know this isn't just a temporary arrangement?" Charlotte's pulse spiked. Before she could respond, James did. "I know," he said smoothly, "because I know my wife." And then, without warning, he pulled her into his arms and kissed her. It wasn't like the kiss the night before. This one was slow, deliberate, like he was proving something, like he wanted her to feel it. Charlotte's breath caught as his lips moved against hers, gentle but insistent, his hand cradling her jaw as if she was something precious. When he finally pulled back, there was a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes, something that told her he hadn't just done that for the board's sake. The room was silent. Then the skeptical woman smiled. "Well," she said, "I suppose that answers my question." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Charlotte's emotions were a tangled mess. She barely had time to process before James turned to her, his expression unreadable. "Charlotte," she held up a hand, her heart pounding. Don't pretend that was just for them." James's jaw tightened. "It wasn't." Her stomach flipped. "Then what was it?" He took a step closer, his voice low. "You know what it was." Her breath hitched. "James, I told myself this would be simple," he murmured, his fingers brushing against her cheek. "A contract, a deal." Charlotte swallowed hard, her pulse thrumming. "And now," James exhaled sharply, like he was fighting something inside himself. "Now I don't know how to stay away from you." Her heart clenched. This wasn't supposed to happen. But as James closed the distance between them, as he reached for her like she was the only thing keeping him grounded, Charlotte realized the truth. She didn't want to stay away from him either. And maybe, just maybe, this had never been just a deal at all. Charlotte thought she had prepared herself for this, for the growing tension between them. For the way James looked at her now, not like she was just a contractually obligated part of his life, but like she was something unexpected, something dangerous. But nothing could have prepared her for what happened next. That night, after James's confession, neither of them said another word. The air between them was thick with unspoken things, but instead of giving in to whatever was pulling them together, James had simply turned and walked away. And Charlotte, she had let him. But the space between them didn't last. The next morning, James was already dressed when Charlotte entered the kitchen. He was standing by the espresso machine, his sleeves rolled up, his tie draped loosely around his neck. He looked as put together as ever, but there was something different in his expression, something guarded. She hesitated, unsure how to navigate what had happened the night before. "Morning," she said carefully. James glanced at her, his blue eyes cool and unreadable. "Morning." He handed her a cup of coffee without asking, the way he always did now. It was such a small thing, so insignificant, that she shouldn't have even noticed it, but it made her chest tighten. She took a sip, trying to steady herself. "So, what's on the agenda today?" "More board meetings, more pretending." James's jaw tensed as he leaned against the counter. "There's an event tonight, a gala." Of course there was. She nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Right, another night of playing the perfect wife." James's gaze flicked to her, something sharp in his expression. "Is that all this still is to you?" Charlotte's heart stuttered, but she refused to let him see it. Instead, she forced a smirk. "Isn't that all it's supposed to be?" James didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached for his tie, loosening it further as he took a step closer. "You keep saying that," he murmured, "but last night when I kissed you..." That was for the board, she interrupted, her voice too quick, too defensive. James studied her, his gaze searching. Was it? Charlotte's throat tightened. She could lie. She could tell him that none of it meant anything, that she hadn't spent half the night replaying the way he had kissed her, the way he had looked at her like she was something he wasn't ready to lose. But lying to him meant lying to herself, and she wasn't sure she could do that anymore. Instead of answering, she turned away, setting her coffee cup down with a little too much force. I should get ready for tonight. James didn't stop her, but she felt his eyes on her long after she left the room. The gala was more extravagant than anything Charlotte had ever seen. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting a golden glow over the ballroom. Waiters in crisp black suits carried trays of champagne, and a live orchestra played soft, elegant music in the background. Charlotte had attended enough of these events by now to know how to play her part. She smiled at the right people. She laughed at the right jokes. She let James keep his hand on the small of her back, even though every touch sent a shiver down her spine. But tonight felt different. Maybe it was because she knew the truth now that whatever was happening between them wasn't just for show. Or maybe it was because James was watching her more closely than usual, his gaze lingering in a way that made her pulse race. Either way, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change, and then it did. James had stepped away to speak with a business associate when a familiar voice behind her made Charlotte freeze. Well, if it isn't Charlotte Hayes. Her stomach dropped. Slowly she turned, already knowing who she would see. Nathan, her ex, the man who had left her drowning in debt, who had taken everything from her and walked away without a second thought. He was standing just a few feet away, looking as smug and arrogant as ever in his expensive suit. I almost didn't recognize you, he said, his gaze sweeping over her. You've certainly upgraded, haven't you? Charlotte forced herself to stay calm. What are you doing here, Nathan? He smirked, taking a sip of his champagne. Networking. You know how it is. Her jaw clenched. I actually don't, Nathan chuckled. Come on, Charlotte, don't act like you're not playing the same game, marrying James Calloway. He let out a low whistle. That's a hell of a move. Her skin went cold. Before she could respond, a firm hand landed on her waist. James. His presence was immediate, overwhelming. His grip on her was gentle but possessive, his body angled slightly in front of hers like a silent warning. And you are, James's voice was smooth, but there was an edge to it, a quiet threat. Nathan grinned, clearly enjoying himself. Just an old friend, James's eyes darkened. I doubt that. Charlotte swallowed hard, suddenly feeling like she was trapped between two storms. Nathan's smirk widened. Relax, Calloway, I was just saying hello to your lovely wife. He turned to Charlotte, his gaze sharp. Isn't that right? Charlotte's pulse pounded in her ears. She could feel James's tension beside her, the way his entire body had gone rigid. She had two choices. She could let Nathan get to her, let him ruin this night, let him plant seeds of doubt in James's mind. Or she could take control. Squaring her shoulders, she lifted her chin and smiled. That's right, she said smoothly. And then, before she could second-guess herself, she turned to James, placed a hand on his chest, and kissed him. It wasn't a soft kiss. It wasn't careful. It was bold and deliberate, a statement. James didn't hesitate. His arms wrapped around her, his mouth pressing into hers with a hunger that sent heat rushing through her veins. By the time they pulled away, Nathan was gone, but Charlotte barely noticed, because James was still holding her, and the way he was looking at her. Like she was the only thing in the world that mattered. That was what terrified her the most.